Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the fourth session of the day. It's been amazing so far, and I'm sure this conversation will be no different. My name's Kieran Howes. I'm the head of content here at HR Grapevine, and we are discussing empowering neurodiverse talent and the importance of inclusivity in learning and development, an incredibly important issue that I'm sure is close to mine and our guests here's hearts. So what we actually have for you straight away is a poll to get you thinking a little bit. I can see some people have already answered that, so that's fantastic, but we'll leave it up a little bit longer and hear what you have to say. The question we're asking you, our audience, is how inclusive do you believe your organization to be? So we'll be really interested in hearing what you have to say. But before we return to that poll, let's intro the people speaking with me today. Thank you all so much for joining me. Nick, maybe you could go first.
Yeah, I'd be delighted, Kieran. Thank you so much for having me. So Nick Ramsey, I lead enterprise sales for Go1, and it is absolutely phenomenal to be asked to be a part of this. It's such a crucial topic, and yeah, delighted to be here with Mandy and Lewis.
Fantastic. Mandy, do you mind going next?
Of course. Thank you, Kieran. Hello, everybody. Like Nick, I'm really excited to be on this panel today. This is such an important topic, and I think we're just scratching the surface of it. So yeah, looking forward to seeing your responses on the polls as well, and working with Nick and Lewis. Thank you.
Fantastic. And last but by no means least, Lewis.
Kieran, thank you so much. And Nick and Manny, I look forward to the session with you and with Karen as well, who will be moderating. I'm Lewis Chesney. I'm the product manager of neurodiversity at Rethink Care. And I'm really excited about sharing some of the knowledge that Rethink Care has accumulated through our work with employer clients who are trying to create supportive environments for their neurodiverse employees. So I look forward to all the questions that are coming in and to this very productive conversation.
Fantastic. As you say, Lewis, we have had some really fantastic questions come in already. We'll be exploring some of those, but by all means do get some more questions in if you have them. If anything springs to mind whilst we're talking, we would love to hear from you and have you be part of this conversation as well. So let's have a little look at the poll that we ran. I can see loads of people have answered. That's really nice. Thanks so much. The question we asked was, how inclusive do you believe your organization to be? Now, I think thankfully 0 people voted for not inclusive at all, so that's a good start. 9.5% said somewhat not inclusive, and I just want to say a big thank you for being honest about that. And hopefully today we can kind of find some ways for you to up the level of inclusivity within your culture. So that's really lovely. 66.6% said somewhat inclusive, and that was by far the largest amount. And 23.8% said very inclusive. Now, I think it's really interesting that the largest demographic here is the somewhat inclusive category, because it means that we have some way to go. And we were kind of talking about this beforehand, weren't we, Mandy, about the journey that you go on in inclusivity, especially within learning and development. So likely you don't feel like you're there yet. And that is not a bad thing. There's always more work to be done. And this is an area that changes very quickly. So yeah, thank you very much for those poll results. I think first things first, getting to our conversation, we need to define our terms here. We need to set the scene. So a key question is, when we talk about neurodiversity, what do we actually mean? And Mandy, maybe you could kind of kick us off here.
Of course, Kieran, thank you. Yes, I did some research before the panel again, because I kind of knew what neurodiversity was, but I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper. And I surprised myself actually about how many different kind of types of neurodiversity there are, or different traits of neurodiversity. And I mean, the list is quite long. But the thing for me as well is that it's about your brain and it's about how you behave, and it's all a little bit different, and that's okay, and that's really good. And I think, Kieran, you said before that that's what makes businesses really good and really thrive, because it is different and not everybody thinks the same. So it's not, we haven't got a bunch of clones working for us. We've got lots of different takes on something, and as a business you can use that and harness that power to to make a change, to problem solve, all sorts of things like that. So yeah, it's really worth looking at the list that's available. I looked at Harvard Medical, and they kind of did lots of description around there. So it's a free resource. So if you wanted to do a little bit more digging, then it's an easy read if you wanted to catch up.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with Mandy's point about building out neurodiverse, inclusive environments and creating teams where all team members have complementary strengths and challenges. So one of the principles of neurodiversity is that none of us are really have none of us have typical minds. So if we think about all of our strengths and challenges, when we think about somebody who is neurodiverse, it usually is related to the strengths that they have and the weaknesses that they have, having very large gaps between them. So, the spike of their largest strength is very similar to the dip of their largest weakness. And in workplace environments, a lot of times it's that dip that creates a barrier for us to see the spikes of the individual. So for instance, early in my career, I had issues with communication. And so I never really interviewed very well, but I was always very analytical minded. And I really did well with anything that I had set myself out to do. But because of the interviewing process, relying too much on my verbal fluency, ability to produce this gift of gab, prevented many potential employers from seeing my abilities. And so the interviewing process, it presents this barrier because we're really essentially assessing the ability of the person to interview well, as opposed to perform the job functions that they would be set out to do if they would be hired. So neurodiversity is about acknowledging the individuals, that have those high peaks and high strengths, and not to edge them out of the employment process.
I think that's really good, Lewis, actually, because we've all been kind of locked away for 3 years and we're just all coming out of it again now. We had to recruit very differently. We had to interview, online. And I think we've hit a really good point there. At Wave, we're looking at how we recruit as well now, because we could be missing a trick in keeping the same recruitment processes that we've always had. And being able to pick up on some of those things. And I think I've got, I've never been very good at maths. I've just been hopeless at it, but always better at the English and reading side of it. So I've self-diagnosed myself around that one. And it really made sense to me today. Absolutely. So when I went for an interview that included numbers, I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. I can't do it. And that's what we do. We put people under extra pressure when we don't need to. So yeah, really good point.
Yeah, some fantastic points there.
Sorry. Yeah, I think just to build on that as well, and we sort of referenced this from the outset, I think the very interesting thing, and I'm not surprised by the sort of 66% in somewhat inclusive, because I think this is still a very new area. And, looking back at my own sort of experience with the education system, and then even when I came into the workplace, I don't really want to disclose when, because I'm starting to feel considerably older, but I think it wasn't really on the agenda. It definitely wasn't spoken about, particularly when I was in high school, for example. I had my own challenges around sort of behavior and lack of concentration and all these things. And it just wasn't part of the narrative. Whereas now we're starting to see a lot more kind of awareness, education, understanding. And I think to both Mandy and Lewis's points, I think the beauty of it that people are starting to recognize is the value and the variety of different people's sort of skills, abilities, the way that they work, the way that they communicate, and really what we can all bring to the table. And I think the more that we kind of build our understanding of that, the more powerful that can become as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I agree.
And we'll talk a bit more, I think, about the value of neurodiversity in just a minute. But I'm really interested, Lewis, you kind of mentioned there some of the barriers that you face at the beginning of the process. And we're discussing how we're becoming so much more aware of those barriers. So it'd be really interesting to hear from each of you what you think those other key barriers are to learning and development, specifically within the context of neurodiversity. And maybe, Nick, you don't mind just kicking us off with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, just to Mandy's point around the pandemic, this is definitely something that's shifted dramatically because it had to, because there was no other option. And I think if we're again speaking historically, one of the biggest barriers, because it's always been very prescribed. So learning was prescribed through a classroom, was prescribed through a new learning module, prescribed through a virtual session. And I think that's been very, very difficult because it hasn't always accounted for neurodiversity and different sort of conditions people have, how the learning and it might actually make them feel, maybe if they're particularly sort of introverted or in some situations maybe non-verbal. So I think, again, both education and corporate education historically hasn't catered for or allowed to accommodate different people. Whereas now, again, because of the pandemic, we had quite a big shift to digital. There's now more variety, more choice, more flexibility. And I guess we're moving towards people being able to self-elect often, what works best for them. And I think that's super, super powerful to be able to see. I think there's still a lot of challenges around, accessibility. There can be challenges even with fundamental things like maybe internet access or the conditions within someone's home. People might still suffer from I guess a level of anxiety or worry about maybe expressing that or having those open conversations. But as we've suggested, we are hopefully kind of continuing to make progress around that as well.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with Nick's point about personalized learning. And I think that that's the direction that we're going in today. But we have to be realistic we can't create 50 different types of modalities, knowing that each of us have our own unique way of learning. So one of the ways to circumvent that is to really be clear about what is the purpose of the learning, right? How is it going to impact the employee who will go through the learning and their teams, right? How is that going to be valuable? How is the learning going to be valuable for their career? Because what that essentially does is increases motivation. And even if the modality of the learning or the formats that are being used within the learning development environment, if they're not conducive to the individual who will be going through the learning, that same individual can seek out other resources that are more complementary to, let's say, their more auditory style of learning or visual style of learning. So it makes them become sort of the expert learner, right? It empowers them to seek out the different resources and tools that can empower them to meet the goals of the learning that were set out for them. The other thing that is important to emphasize too is some of the barriers that can be presented in the learning environment can be easily mitigated. So just to be sure, as I mentioned, make sure that people understand the value of the learning. So what's in it for me? So make sure that there's a clear linkage between the learning material and what is the ultimate HR or business outcome of that learning that's specific to the individual, whether they're a manager, an employee, they work in HR or they're in leadership, but also making sure that these instructions that are provided are, very clear and avoids different types of jargon, making sure that the learning environment is also safe and is open to individuals making mistakes, right? So making sure that there are feedback loops that are incorporated into the learning so that people don't feel that they're not getting support along the way of their journey.
I agree. I think you really picked someone a good point as well, Lewis and Nick as well, around stigma and around psychological safety as well, because those are really big barriers to people learning. And I think that probably starts back from education, particularly like me, when you're a little bit older and you went through a different type of education. It's really refreshing to see that kind of starting to move away now. And the only guess that one of the things I would say from a learning perspective is that if people do have special requirements and neurodiverse traits, then if they feel confident and able to talk them to the L&D team or to their manager, then that can be really helpful. But if they haven't got the confidence to say anything, then it's a little difficult sometimes to pick up. So we need to create that confidence, that safe environment for people to be able to share some of the things that they don't get. And I think managers as well, we're just about to start some management development around what does, if I've got somebody with neurodiverse traits in my team, how do I help them? How do I support them through their learning and their performance as well, actually, because that can have an impact too. And to pick up on your point as well, Lewis, around what's the point of the learning? How do you measure the success of it as well? So, half the group might get it, another 2 or 3 people might not. So how do we help those people who didn't with some coaching or mentoring or whatever it is? And that's where social learning comes in really helpful as well. So you can use buddies and mentors to help people. So yeah, there are barriers, but there's also an answer to them as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. You picked up on something really interesting there, I think, and it's worth emphasizing that we already kind of established this is a developing space. This is relatively new thinking of considering this demographic, this really valuable demographic of talent, and the way that people were brought up considering learning, it may have disillusioned them to the concept of learning. So actually, it's really interesting that maybe one of the first barriers that you'll face is that stigma around learning for people who haven't had good learning in their life, haven't found good techniques to do that. And absolutely as well, because it's a developing space, empowering people to feel like they can not only share those those neurodiverse points in their life, those neurodiverse parts of them, but actually champion it, because and what we'll move on to next is that these people can be a phenomenal benefit to your business. So I'm making that bold statement, and I'm hoping that you, the 3 of you, are going to back me up here. Lewis, maybe this is one for you then. What are the big key benefits of having a neurodiverse workforce?
Sure. Well, the one thing is we are missing out on individuals that provide unique perspectives, right? So if you're building out teams where people have matching personalities and dispositions, you're essentially creating an echo chamber, right? And that can be a huge barrier to innovation and ultimately positive business outcomes and competitiveness, et cetera. So it's really good to have a neurodiverse individual or just several neurodiverse individuals on your team if you're going through a concerted hiring effort. But just in general, when we think about people who think, act, and socialize differently, if we can bring all of them together, then what essentially happens is people are encouraged. Going back to Mandy's point about psychological safety, right? That needs to be set in place. So once there's psychological safety, people are more willing to disagree with things because they're coming into a problem with a different perspective. And then people are just bringing in different solutions which then start to synthesize, right? And then ultimately that end product is the solution that's going to solve the problem. So that's it, in my opinion, the benefit.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Mandy, Nick, any other kind of things to add on that subject?
I think, yeah, I mean, some of the things that I've seen are around data interrogation and problem solving and being really curious about how to break something. So, let's just push the buttons and see what happens. And a couple of colleagues like that who actually thrive on being able to find out how something works and probably have always done that since they were very small. So I would say, yes, definitely add those into the mix for me. Nick, I don't know about you.
I love the phrase Lewis, unique perspectives. And I think that really nicely sort of summarizes the value and the benefit, particularly around, their ability to challenge, the ability to kind of ideate, the ability to really look at things perhaps slightly differently. And something I'm personally really passionate about is being part of a diverse team. Like, I don't want to work with a bunch of people just like me, that look like me, act like me, think like me. I actually can't think of anything worse, to be honest. I think it's super impactful and beneficial to have that variety of thinking, diversity of thinking, to call it even more appropriately. So yeah, I think Louis' phrase of unique perspective just captures it phenomenally.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there's an argument to be made here as well, aside from all of your fantastic arguments and just the pure ethical, the pure ethics of the situation, that we want to make sure the workplace is as open and welcoming for everyone as possible. But there's an argument to be made here for the power of a learning culture, isn't there? And actually, you can only have a true learning culture if everyone is brought on that journey.
I agree, absolutely. Because if you don't have people on that learning journey and have that safety around that learning journey to make mistakes, as you said, then you don't have a performance culture either, because you're not encouraging people to learn to be better or be the best they can be or want to be. So yeah, absolutely agree with that. And it's about people's confidence as well, and being able to sort of go, yeah, I don't know how to do that now, and I'm not sure I can, but who can help me? How do I go out and find it? And I think we're seeing a little bit more of that now, which is great, which is really, really refreshing. Don't know about the other guys.
I think is once again, Mandy, absolutely right in terms of sort of that ability for curiosity and also sort of self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
And if those options are closed or have some of the barriers that we referenced previously, I think that's where you can run into a lot of issues. So fundamentally, it has to begin by creating an environment where learning is a central, pivotal part of the business performance. And certainly with the organizations, that I've worked with sort of throughout my career, where that happens, that's where you see, the most impact and the most results. And also, as a byproduct of that, more sort of open opportunities with to people with neurodiversity as well.
Absolutely. The other important point to bring up too is when we're evaluating an individual on their learning, it's important to recognize that, again, we're still very early stage in the process of building out a more personalized learning environment. So there will be individuals who will go through formal training and come out of it and feel that they may have not had the supports that they needed in order to complete the training effectively. But if we consider that the most important measure of success is how well the person was able to apply the learning to the actual work environment, when we assess work outcomes, we're giving that person who struggled the opportunity, again, going back to the earlier point about seeking resources and tools that are more conducive to their learning. Because really, formal training it's the first step. It's there to make us minimally competent in a specific area. Let's say for a manager, coaching, but that is the start of a continuous learning journey. And then through that learning journey, the neurodiverse manager can continue to look at resources that are available to them, which are now coming out of this pandemic or more widely accessible, to ensure that their ability to coach employees is assessed based on the ultimate outcomes of their team, right? Of the outcome, the productivity outcomes of your team, as opposed to the way that we have been doing it is through doing straight evaluations, post-learning evaluations, which can be unnerving for somebody, again, who doesn't respond well to specific modalities or formats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point. And it really brings us on to our next segment, the third key area of our conversation, which is what good looks like now. What does good learning look like in 2023? So, where does learning now take place? How does it take place? I'm interested in hearing from all three of you on this point.
Shall I jump in?
Yeah, dive in.
Bread and butter. So good learning for us at Wave looks like really promoting and doing some more work with our Absorb platform, which is our LMS, which we sort of implemented just as COVID hit, and has really helped us to change how we learn, which has been fabulous. We've also got some amazing content from Go One. Thank you, Nick. Which has really supported our neurodiverse journey as well. Some great stuff on there. And then moving forward, it's about giving people headspace in order to learn. So if you're always busy doing the do, when do you get to learn? Because everybody has a life outside of work as well. And I think maybe those lines got a little bit blurred during the pandemic, but they're starting to open up a little bit more again, very differently. We're also seeing that with the content we've selected and also the platform we've got, that they already are appealing to people, not just with neurodiversity, but everybody. So there's accessibility guides, the colours that they use, the content that we provide is all very accessible to all colleagues. So that's great. And we want to build on that going forwards. We also want to promote collaborative and social learning as well, to support each other as we're going through our learning journey. So to Lewis's point about, show me how to do it and then let me do it to prove that I can. That's what we're going to be focusing on with skills and interrogating data going forwards. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is one of my colleagues, Claire, set up a parent group for neurodiverse parents. It's looking like that's going to be going forwards for the next April time. And I think that's brilliant, because that means that you're opening up that whole conversation to people across the business, which is good. Yeah, so 2023 is looking very exciting.
Mm-hmm. That's good to hear. Nick, this is obviously an ideal question for you really as well.
Of course, absolutely. I think the exciting thing here, especially if we keep it on the lens of sort of neurodiversity, is we are now in a close to post-pandemic world, and it means that we can now be back in the workplace, we can be back in training classrooms, but we can also be working from home. And again, just to probably sort of reiterate the early point that I made, is really the exciting thing is around the flexibility that now offers the individual and the learner. So just as Lewis was speaking about a moment ago, I think being able to offer, hyper-personalized learning experiences, whether that's something targeted at a team of people or an individual that maybe has sort of specific needs or preferences. I think the ability as well, just coming back to what we were saying around empowering managers and leaders, to be able to know how to kind of work with and coach someone with neurodiversity, and how we can be changing the approaches there. If you've got someone in your team, they might need to be handled in this way, they might communicate better in this particular environment. I think that's really powerful as well. I think the other really exciting thing, obviously the space that we operate in, is just around the emerging technologies that are continuing to evolve around us every day from a learning standpoint. So Mandy referenced their skills, which is obviously a huge topic for every organization, identifying, the current sort of skills and capabilities, the gaps, future skills, and how you line people up to, the right sort of learning, the right experiences to help them get there. And again, I think the power in that, particularly for people with neurodiversities, we now have far better data, far better systems, and just a lot more kind of power to be able to hopefully match them up to learning that's going to really benefit them, both in the kind of the short term and the long term. So yeah, it's really, really exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah, and just to go off with what Nick and Mandy have shared already, I agree with their points about more flexible or remote learning opportunities for individuals who don't respond well to traditional learning environments, sort of like in classroom. And the other thing is, I know I've been talking about different modalities and formats. Online learning platforms offer, different formats and options. So video for your visual learners, audio for the auditory learners, interactive exercises for those who are more tactile. What we do at Rethink Care is we have our professional resilience platform. And for those of you who are on this, you can access those through the playlist. And these are micro-learning sessions, right? So what micro-learning essentially does, it finds the common denominator across all different types of learning, because everyone, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, can benefit from short bite-sized learning chunks. So that's what we provide. And it's also easily accessible, and it's scalable to your entire workforce if you're interested. So that's, I think we may be on time at times, so that's my answer.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. That's really great. Another key point that I think that we need to talk about here, which Nick, you kind of picked up on a tiny bit actually, is the role of the manager actually in here. I think we need to kind of explore that a bit more, because it's such an essential relationship. So yeah, what are the keys to really ensuring that line managers and management is embracing this and promoting, learning for anyone of any kind of neurodiversity or anyone really, I guess. Yeah, anyone jump in, go for it.
I think, personally, my personal opinion, I think that we should be including training around neurodiversity as part of leadership programs. And leadership programs look very different now than they did back at, probably 10 years ago, because the world's turned. And I think that to give some focus on that is really important, because we talk about managing your team and communicating with your team and helping your team to perform, but we don't talk about the different characters that are often made up of part of that team. And I think, as I was thinking back to when I did my training with CIPD, I'm not sure that I remember us doing anything around neurodiversity. So I think it's important to start weaving it through how you manage your team. So absolutely key. And that will take away some of the stigma as well. And we can help people learn in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think to build on that, Mandy obviously referenced psychological safety, and I think that's obviously a primary concern of, understanding that you can have those kind of open, sort of vulnerable conversations with your manager, and it can be, something that can be discussed and you can be aware of in your team. I think to take it to a slightly more unsavory avenue as well, is that organizations probably want to be very careful to avoid cases of discrimination or situations where people feel bullied or kind of outcast because of the neurodiversity. And I think that's a similar responsibility to issues around race, gender, sexuality, and so on, because as far as I'm concerned, they are of equal importance. So I think there is also just not it's like a precautionary thing, but I think it's important for organizations to recognize as well the risk and the damage that can occur if there is a situation where someone maybe isn't accommodated or made to feel part of the team. And that obviously starts with, the management and leadership of an organization. So yeah, completely agree with Mandy. I feel it should be certainly part of any management leadership program. And then there could probably be some separate sort of ongoing enablement as well, just around sort of different things that might be a benefit for them to understand as well.
Mm-hmm. Before we kind of segue into a slightly different point, I just wanted to go back to that we asked the audience another poll question. We actually asked the audience, where are you on your L&D journey? I think this may be a really nice time to hear what they have to say on that. It's really relevant to what we've been talking about. So we got loads of fantastic responses. So thanks so much to our audience for responding. Just 4% said exactly where they want to be, which is a poignant thing in itself, isn't it? We've talked so much about it being a journey and us being early collectively in the journey of making sure that we're getting this completely right. 18% said close to where we want to be. So that's nice to see that, people are on, some people are going through that journey and are satisfied where they are. 32% said getting there. 36% said early in the journey. And actually just 10% said just starting. So it seems like the audience is kind of, they're on the track, they're getting there. So hopefully some of the things that we've discussed so far have been helpful in making you kind of rethink certain areas, definitely. So that's really nice. Thanks so much for getting involved to audience. So I guess the next part of the conversation really is the why, and we'll talk about this briefly, and then we will go into some of the great audience questions that we've got. So the key question here that I want to ask is, what are the key objectives with an L&D offering? What are the core things that they should be achieving? Because starting with that why, knowing why you're doing it, is obviously incredibly important. So Mandy, I'm going to come to you here first.
Thank you. The why for me is about linking learning and development to what it is we're trying to achieve as a business. So our business is made up of people. So how do we harness the strengths of those people and the differences in those people to help us achieve our overall goals? Now, I'm incredibly lucky because our Wave leadership team are so pro development that they're really supportive in that space, and they give their time to it. Could we do more? Absolutely, we can. But I think watching people have those light bulb moments, or getting promoted, or really finding something that they are passionate about when they're learning, does it for me all the time. But it also means that they're performing at their best as well. So it's a mix really of making sure that people have the right tools and skills to be able to do their roles, but give them some additional support and learning that makes them want to be the best they can be. And that's kind of how I'd sum it up, really.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, my dog just sneezed.
Nick, what about you? What do you think here?
Yeah, once again, Mandy and I are very, very aligned here, unsurprisingly. Learning, for me, good learning should drive business goals and outcomes. It's as simple as that. So if you can develop and build an effective learning strategy, you can influence and change performance. And then by doing so, you can drive towards, whatever the ultimate business goals are. And I think, it's very interesting given those poll responses. It's good to know that most people are on that journey or somewhere on that kind of spectrum, and I'm not too surprised by that at all. I think things can obviously fluctuate, change depending on the situation, the economy, any number of different scenarios. But I think if you fundamentally focus on having that sort of learning culture at the core, they are the most sort of successful organizations. The last thing I would say, Kieran, actually you mentioned it yourself, is just coming back to that why, of using that as the lens and the question for any learning intervention. Why are we doing this? What is it we want to change? What's the impact going to be? Who's involved? Who's affected by this? What can we achieve? And then obviously, just again, bring it back to the neurodiversity, is just thinking about how you can accommodate as many people as possible, make that as encompassing for people. And I think that's the kind of sort of utopian place that I think everyone sort of wants to work towards.
That's really good. That's really good as well, because it's made me think that if you're developing your people in the right way and they're achieving their goals and the business is successful, then that reflects on how you interact with your customers as well. So they see Absolutely. You as being open and transparent, and they have a really great relationship with you. Whereas if you don't encourage learning and performance, then you probably don't get that same customer interaction. I could be wrong, but it just feels like it's that thing.
Yeah.
Great point. Right, Lewis, I'm actually going to kick off with some audience questions with you here. And to start us off, I think I've had a really interesting question in from the audience, and it's about another key aspect of 2023, as well as all of the benefits that we're getting from kind of understanding more about this space. Budgets are extremely tight, and a few people have written in expressing that. So I'd love to know from you how we get the most from our budget and where that budget is best allocated.
Sure. So one of the recurring themes in this discussion is building a culture of learning. So encouraging first individuals to seek out their learning, right? To seek out the tools and resources that are readily available to them, that are public, that they can access. The caveat with that is, especially in this neurodiversity space, is there really isn't a centralized hub that's publicly available that brings out or brings together the different stakeholders who are impacted by a lot of the neurodiversity initiatives. So if you go to public resources, you're typically going to get information on neurodiversity from the neurodiverse perspective, from the medical perspective. So what I encourage employers to do is to invest in online platforms that offer micro learning sessions. These are very scalable and they're inexpensive, relatively inexpensive, and can be easily disseminated across your entire workforce. And then, utilize internal resources. So champions within your disability ERGs who can internally market these micro learning trainings across the entire employee base could be a really, really efficient way of doing things. So again, fostering that culture is important, but also understanding that not only the information that's out there that's public is credible and legitimate, and it's important to work with trusted partners like Rethink Care, who brings in subject matter experts who are clinicians, who are industrial psychologists, that could inform us on the development of this learning, but then also making a concerted effort internally to disseminate this learning, right? Because it's no use if you purchase, let's say, our professional resilience and not internally market it to your employee base. So getting those neurodiversity champions behind this training and development, and from different chapters, right? If you're a large organization, and making sure that the different individuals with those offices, managers, HR leaders, senior leaders are accessing this learning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm going to squeeze in some more questions, if you don't mind. I really want to get to as many as we possibly can, and time is running by extremely fast. So, Mandy, I think this is a really good one for you. And that is, someone's asked, how do we get colleagues to share that they are neurodiverse with their employers? It's a big question, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Okay. I would say that so part of it is your culture. So how do you develop a culture where people are able to have those conversations with their manager or with HR or, a mentor in the business? And I think if we are focusing on learning in the neurodiverse space, then that makes it okay to talk about it. So an example for me is I had a conversation with a chap called Alex Manners, and you've heard this before, Kieran, and he has Asperger's, and he's a writer, he's a children's TV presenter, he's a disc jockey, he does all sorts of stuff, and I got him to come along and talk to the business about his struggle and how he got on with it and where he is now. And that really opened a lot of doors and a lot of conversations once he'd spoken. I think most of our colleagues listened to him, and it was during the pandemic. And that's kind of started to open the door slightly where people are starting to talk about it. So it's about providing opportunities for people to come together and discuss. So you might not be in the neurodiverse camp, but you may be sitting next to somebody who is. And then once you're having this discussion, they feel able and confident to be able to talk to you about it. But there are some people, obviously, who won't feel confident about it. And it's about, as a manager, once you've been through training, to being able to open up that conversation with your employee. It's early days, so we're pushing on an open door, but any opportunities you get to have those discussions, I would say promote them and promote the days. There's lots of days around the place, around the world, that you can promote that will help bring those conversations out.
Yeah, lovely answer there. And Nick, I'm going to squeeze one last question in there, and I'd like to ask you this one. Okay. How do we build learning into the everyday practices of our business?
Oh, nice question. I think as we've referenced throughout, and just being real about where we are in 2023, like time is a very valuable resource, and even in remote or hybrid working environments, people's time is often stretched. Spend a lot of time on technology and so on. So I think it's about, wherever possible, probably three kind of pillars. First of all, the personalization that we've talked about. So try and show them something interesting, something relevant, something where they can see the value for them. Secondly, I would say, just coming back to Lewis's point around sort of bite-sized, digestible, whether that means it's slightly shorter, or it means it's maybe something they can dip in and out of, or, you know, they do the main part of the learning experience and there's something for, you know, for after they can refer back to. But I think making it really digestible for people is super, super important as well. And then thirdly, I think giving them or signposting them to sort of further learning resources or other areas where they can access information. So I think one of the biggest failures of learning in the past is you do a course, or you go through something, and, you know, the end, you move on from it and you go back to your job. I think instead now we're in a place where you can actually sort of refer them or signpost them to other material, further development opportunities, or, you know, even facilitating a conversation with their manager to unlock, you know, more learning on that particular area.
Fantastic.
So yeah, in 1 minute or less, that's my top
Perfect.
three.
Thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. To our audience, stick around. We've got more great sessions coming up. And to my guests here, thank you so much. It's been a brilliant conversation.
Beautiful. There's one last thing here, and I'll reference super quickly again. We have also created a kind of a free learning pathway for anyone on the session, covering off topics on neurodiversity for managers, and the value of thinking differently. And Lewis, I know you've got a white paper as part of that as well.
Fantastic. Those should be just below us right now. So thanks so much again. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks,
Beautiful.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.